a signature just hours ago, President Trump is paving the way for the Department of Education to be dismantled. He signed an executive order today in a ceremony at the White House. It's likely to face legal opposition. The order directs Education Secretary Linda McMahon to take steps toward its closure. Fully abolishing the department altogether requires congressional approval. Republicans are planning legislation to dismantle the department.
President Trump's executive actions regarding the Department of Education marks the latest effort by conservatives to change, reform, or outright close the federal agency. Since its founding in 1979, it has faced calls for reform from the political right. In fact, President Jimmy Carter may have created the department in 1979, but less than 3 years later, President Ronald Reagan used his State of the Union address to call for the department to be dismantled.
The budget plan I submit to you on February 8th will realize major savings by dismantling the Departments of Energy and Education.
And while the Education Department was not eliminated in the 1980s, in the 1990s, calls for it to be shut down continued. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich in 1995 said, quote, "The country did not need a federal Department of Homework checkers." But still, the Department of Education continued through the Bush years and even through the first term of President Donald Trump. But as President Trump returned to the White House, he made clear that 2025 was the year for change, something that has already happened. Around 2,000 Department of Education employees have either left or been terminated since January. The question now is, how well will programs like financial aid and student loan processing be handled, programs that Congress has mandated the federal government take on? It's important to remember what Secretary of Education Linda McMahon said just a few weeks ago on Capitol Hill.
Do you agree, and let me just once again get your feelings on this, that if there is a movement to abolish the Department of Education, it has to go through the United States Congress?
Yes, it is set up by the United States Congress, and we work with Congress. It clearly cannot be shut down without it.
Joe St. George, Scripps News Group, Washington.
I'm Madison Weil here outside of San Diego Unified School District, where there's definitely a lot of uncertainty about what dismantling the Department of Education might mean for staff and students. I spoke with the board president to get an answer to some of those questions.
We rely on the federal government to do its part.
SDUSD board president Cody Pedersen says about 6% of SDUSD's budget is federally funded. Those dollars generally support students with special needs, low-income students, and military families.
It's very important for us and for our families and students for us to remain calm. However, we're also bearing in mind that this is the very beginning of a very disruptive process.
Pedersen says the district is already preparing for the cuts in the millions of dollars. But it's not just funding that will be impacted. As he explains, the Department of Education also provides oversight on things like civil rights.
It's very likely that in this situation, you would see a substantial impact to Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education and other things that guarantee that there is not discrimination across our country in schools around gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, disability status. It's concerning.
Over at Lakeside Union School District, federal funding only accounts for about 4% of their budget.
The rest comes from the state of California and local property tax.
Andrew Hayes, a Lakeside Union School District board member, says he hopes dismantling the Department of Education will lead to savings at the federal level, which can be funneled back to schools in new ways.
Quite frankly, what I'd really love to see is the savings that President Trump's going to get from this consolidation pass through to local districts in the form of grants, because a lot of districts locally in San Diego certainly could benefit from receiving some extra resources.
For families feeling anxious, Hayes says to keep in mind the majority of the budget for our local school districts is decided at the state level. And in the meantime, local school districts will be doing everything they can to ensure students are minimally impacted by the changes.
To me, local control is the best. It's where the rubber hits the road. And so ultimately, we know what we need to do.
It's also important to remember that Trump signing this executive order just marks the very beginning of this process. It's unlikely things can move forward without an act of Congress. From SDUSD, Madison